All right, this is part three. We just finished discussing how to score and analyze the measures for uh, assessing prior knowledge. Now we're talking about how to analyze and score the oral miscues. So you should know by now how to code and record substitutions, omissions, insertions, self-corrections, reversals, punctuation, meaning changing, etc. If not, go to pages 60 and 61 to see how to do that. And again, if they can't identify the word, you ask them to skip it and move on, and then repetitions and hesitations are not counted as errors. So let's quickly review from last week what total accuracy versus total acceptability is. So total accuracy are all miscues. This would include insertions, omissions, substitutions, reversals, and self-corrections. Total acceptability, on the other hand, are only meaning-changing miscues, and that would be miscues that change the meaning syntactically or semantically. So we'll take a look at my student's miscues, and she did a lot of meaning-changing miscues that changed the meaning syntactically, and these are not self-corrected. So when I look at her pre-primer for Lost and Found, she only had a couple of repetitions, and I think because she wasn't tracking appropriately, so she actually had 0 miscues for total accuracy, 0 miscues for total acceptability, so she scored at the independent level for pre-primer 3 narrative. Then when I went to primer, Fox and Mouse, she had a self-correction here. For watered, she said weighted, so that's a meaning changing. For dug, she said digged. Now that's meaning changing because it creates a grammatically incorrect sentence. For thought, she said thoughted, meaning changing. For dug, again, she said digged for meaning changing. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 miscues for total accuracy. Remember, self-corrections count, but only 4 miscues for total acceptability. So this would put her in the instructional level there. So if you want to help your student decrease substitutions, that's where the student replaces the existing word. It is the most common type of miscue. You want to take a look, is the substitution visually, semantically, or syntactically in agreement with the existing word, because that will illuminate which cueing system they are using. If many words are not known, you may need to lower the level of text. You want to teach them how to take time to use word attack strategies like saying the beginning sound, reading the rest of the sentence, and chunking the word. You can also do cloze exercises to teach them how to predict the word based on meaning. So let's talk a little bit about meaning changing substitutions. This is when a student substitutes a word that does not make sense. Call attention to the miscue by saying, you just read blah, blah, blah. Did that make sense? Why or why not? Giving them that immediate feedback and making them aware of the miscue often will help. You can also have them stop and reread or do oral exercises where they have to identify a word in the sentence that doesn't make sense. And cloze exercises are also good for this, as well as covering up keywords and stories and having them predict what would go in the blank based on the meaning of the story. Now, non-meaning changing substitutions are where the student substitutes a word or phrase that still makes sense. They might not be taking time to attempt unknown words. So you want to commend them for reading for meaning, have them read and discuss discrepancies from the text, and encourage them to attempt new words and be patient. A lot of times this requires using more of their visual cueing system. All right, decreasing guessing at words. Student guesses at new words instead of analyzing the word, possibly visual or graphophonic miscues. Examine the situation further. If guessing regular one-syllable words, give the phonics survey and see what that shows. Definitely provide feedback. You could do some of that precision reading, teach word attack strategies, or create a cloze where you replace the word guessed with a blank line and the student decide what word is missing using context. Decreasing omissions. Omissions are the second most common type of miscue. Either the student doesn't know the word and skips it, which stilts fluency, or the student is reading rapidly and as a result carelessly. Omissions lead to diminished comprehension, and you need to determine the cause of the omissions. If it's a decoding, sight vocabulary, or structural analysis issue, you will need to tackle it from that end. If it's a careless reading issue, draw attention to the issue, provide timely feedback to break the habit. You can record the student and have them listen to it with the text, and you may need to bring back finger pointing for a little bit of time. Insertions are words added by the reader. They are the third most common type of miscue. A lot of times the student anticipates what should come next instead of actually reading the word. However, if insertion doesn't make sense, then there is an even greater comprehension problem. Only intervene if this is occurring very frequently. It's somewhat normal to see one or two of these. You'd want to provide feedback, do some precision reading, encourage the student to read more slowly. You can even record the student and show them what the results are. Decreasing inversions and reversals. Reading words from right to left, reversing a letter in a word, or switching the order of words read in a sentence. Those are all categorized as inversions or reversals. It's a normal symptom of poor decoding. Student hasn't developed strong enough visual image of the word, for example, form and from, confusing those, inverting the two letters. You'd want to use big books to teach left to right, use poetry and songs, write words in pairs, sometimes reverse, like was and saw. Use one in a sentence and have student write it, and draw the reader's attention to the context of the reading. Also, when you're looking at the student's oral reading, you want to look at the miscues they're making, the types of miscues they're making, and if you can look for patterns and trends and determine why they might be making those miscues. But also you're going to want to look at automaticity via words per minute and correct words per minute. So make sure you don't forget to time how long it takes the reader to read. Here are the quantitative stats from my reader. At the pre-primer 3 level, the total reading time was 36 seconds. Her words correct per minute was 112.9 words. Typically, you want to look at the Hasbro and Tyndall rubric to see what percentile ranking that would give her, but there are no scores for kindergarten, so I was not able to do that. Her error ratio was 0, essentially, because she had 0 errors. Self-correction ratio was also 0. I mean, those aren't really valuable pieces of information because she had no errors and no self-corrections. At the primer level, it took her 74 seconds. Her words correct per minute was 94.86 words correct in a minute. Again, when I looked at Hasbro and Tyndall, I couldn't get any percentile score from that, but if your student is first grade or above reading level, take a look at that. Her error ratio, so for 122 words, she had 5 errors, which gives me the ratio of for every 24.4 words read, she had 1 error. Self-correction ratio is that for every 5 errors, she had 1 self-correction. So those are the quantitative stats I was able to glean. Now, when you are reporting your information from the QRI, you want to make sure this handy dandy chart is very useful. You put the passage name, you put the level, you put the type, narrative or expository. You do the percent accuracy, percent acceptability, percent familiarity based on prior knowledge, retelling percentage, number explicit correct, number implicit correct, and then overall number of questions. So this is a nice chart that would be useful for your assessment artifact and reflection number 5. Another great table comes from page 400 of your text, where you write the word in the text, how the student responded, and then analyze to see if it's meaning changing, contextually acceptable, self-corrected, graphophonically similar, etc. And actually, I prefer this table, which is from page 67 of your QRI-5. It really helps you analyze those miscues. So again, this isn't going to be very helpful to see trends and patterns if your student only had one or two miscues, but in the case that you give them something at their instructional level and they have more miscues, you want to write down the word in the text, then what the miscue is. Are they similar letter sound patterns? Does it change the meaning? Was it corrected meaning changing? Does it not change the meaning? Was it corrected non-meaning changing? And that's on page 67. So you can see what that looks like, but this is awesome for analyzing those miscues in a very systematic and easy to see way. All right, let's talk about scoring the retell, which is chapter 10 of your QRI-5, pages 71 through 75. This indicator, the retell, is actually not used to determine the reading level, but it can still give you some very good information. You simply place a check next to each idea that the student explicitly recalls, or if you want to get fancy, you can sequence the recalled ideas by using a number instead of a check. So the first idea they recall gets a 1, second idea they recall gets a 2. Also, in your text, they discuss taking an interesting spin on retelling by rating the importance of each piece of the retell, then giving the most important a 1, giving the least important a 3, giving all others a 2. Then as the child retells, you would number each by the order it was retold. And then you can compute the ideas recalled for each level of importance. So you can calculate the percentage of the most important ideas recalled versus the percentage of the least important recalled to see if they're attending to more main ideas versus details. So this method actually tells you the amount recalled, the sequence of the recall, and the level of recalled information. So this is a very high level of analysis that would be awesome for you to do on your reflection of your QRI. So here you see that I chose not to do that, and I just put the check marks by the ideas recalled. There were 30 ideas in total. The student recalled 20, which was a good amount. Most of them came actually from the resolution piece and then from the ideas. So she recalled 66% of the ideas. Again, if I wanted to get fancy, I could have numbered these in the order retold, or I could next to each statement indicate if it's very important with a 1 or not as important with a 3, and then see overall what percentage of those most important ideas did she recall. All right, let's talk about scoring the questions. I'm afraid I may run out of time before finishing up with this, but there are two types of questions on the QRI. The explicit questions are explicitly stated right there in the text. The implicit questions, the reader has to use clues to make inferences for. Again, you should not be giving half points for questions, and the authors recommend using lookbacks, especially for grades 3 and up. And then if you want to determine the level based on the number of ideas or number of comprehension questions correctly answered, see page 76. All right, this chart reminds us that there is a hierarchy of comprehension. So you have questions that are at the literal level, where the student is recognizing stated information or reading the lines. Then you have the interpretive comprehension or inferencing level, which is reading between the lines. And then lastly, you have the critical comprehension level, which is reading beyond the lines. So when you're looking at the question types your student is correctly answering or not correctly answering, you kind of want to look, is this a literal question, an interpretive question, or a critical question? The QRI only really has literal and interpretive, implicit and explicit questions, so that may not be as much help with critical. All right, I'm going to stop there and I will see you back for our last part.